Hi. If you're like me, you hear a constant stream of announcements about hydrogen. Every week or so in the news media I see a new announcement about hydrogen here or hydrogen there. What's really happening? And what do these organisations think they're gaining? And why exactly hydrogen? Hi, this is the first of a series where I'm attempting to dive deeper and will focus on the concepts, technology, engineering, and of course economics of hydrogen. My assumption is that collectively we're all aiming for a net zero emission profile by 2050. I believe that this is challenging but not impossible with today's technology. How are we going to get there? How will this transition occur? Incumbent industries and businesses often don't mind muddying the water, making it difficult for the average person to understand. This first episode is an introduction that explains where hydrogen fits in. Predicting the future is always a tricky prospect, and no doubt I will be proved wrong again and again and again. However, we have now, I think, arrived at a time where the building blocks are in place, but just waiting for the right signals. Once we start, piece by piece, costs will start to fall, and we can indeed get to that net zero by 2050. And this is an opportunity. It will provide jobs, prosperity, and change the face of the planet. If we're going to displace hydrocarbons, then we must consider the full suite of energy uses. We hope that we can replace all those hydrocarbons still buried in the ground with energy that streams every day from the sun. Look at oil. Commercial operations started in the 1880s in Poland, Russia, and the USA, but it took until 1966 for it to become the predominant energy source in the world. Our continued use of hydrocarbons as coal has changed the world. That energy enabled new products, trade, transportation, wealth, and development across the globe. Use of hydrocarbons was a significant factor driving the substantial growth throughout the world, especially in the last century. Obviously, it also caused pollution on a massive and global scale. And since economically no one had to pay real money for those changes to our world, there was no disincentive in continuing to do it. Now our future generations will have to live in the world we have changed. To get to net zero, we have only a quarter of a century to turn things around. This chart simplistically illustrates the challenge ahead. Oil and coal demand will decrease from today and reduce to some kind of steady nominal value. Other energy sources will have to increase to replace hydrocarbons and other polluting sources. So hydrocarbons will not go to zero, and replacement energy sources are going to take some time to develop. This is a plan that nations have signed up to. In this series, I assume that this transition is going to happen. Ask me to predict the date that hydrocarbons are overtaken by hydrogen, then that's hard to estimate, but it will happen. It happened for wood, coal in the past, and inevitably will happen for oil and other hydrocarbons. History's taught us this. Hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal deposits developed over millions of years based upon the capture of sunlight, conversion of that sunlight by algae and plants, and then over further millions of years in the earth to natural gas, LPG, oil, and coal was not a particularly efficient process. And consider that at best photosynthesis is only 3% or so efficient. We've now reached the tipping point where it is feasible to replace hydrocarbons, and it is nearing economic. In future episodes I'll go into more detail, but most of the technologies are in place today. The sheer size of the energy replacement objective necessitates massive scale up. As the size of each installation increases, the cost reduces, making this type of energy increasingly competitive. Investors and banks will be attracted to the stable, long-term returns on these investments. Soon, and well before 2050, their use will be cheaper than the majority of hydrocarbons. So why would you keep using the more expensive options? So the changes in the energy mix will be decided by these economics. As more wind and solar farms proliferate around the world, you and I can clearly see how these changes might occur. The first scale-up of these technologies will be for stationary linked applications. Naturally, the first thought is that these facilities will supply electricity through connected wires, transmission as we know it today. Those facilities will replace some hydrocarbons with electricity via today's grid. And of course, that EV car charging is essentially a static activity. After all, you drive to a car charging station. Electrical supply has become more dynamic, and with the increasing portion of variable wind and solar, supply imbalances can lead to both very high and even negative prices. Fluctuations in supply and demand will tend to drive alternative energy production, up to a point where there's excessive supply and falling economics for new installations. Even within this framework, there will be periods of abundant electricity, excessive supply driving negative prices. Thus, excess electrical supply creates opportunity for hydrogen production, and assigning capital to electrolyzers will aid attempts to even out peaks and troughs and stabilize pricing. The push to replace expensive hydrocarbons will combine with the pull from users and consumers and their expectations of less carbon-intensive solutions. These forces will continue to drive further expansion and production. These trends can be seen today. New super facilities, a combination of SWB, solar, wind and batteries, storage really, will provide the core energy source. Each will have differing splits of each element depending upon the country and the local area. The economics of sharing and storing to even out the diurnal variation is necessary to achieve the most efficient capital factorization. Rather than be restricted to a day cycle of around 12 hours of daylight, adding wind can still provide energy when the sun goes down, and linking both with batteries that can store energy during the middle of the day or the middle of the night when electricity prices are at their lowest helps make the most of production sources. Returns can be maximized providing the most energy during the peak periods, morning and evening, when electricity is at its most valuable. As SWB costs reduce, conversion of excess electricity via electrolyzers into hydrogen will start to make economic sense. Hydrogen can be produced from clean water and electricity via an electrolyzer. Firstly, for the most local of users close to the facility, but eventually for others as demand increases. When considering the replacement of hydrocarbons, transportability is the first key factor. Hydrocarbons are pretty easy to transport, and we've developed significant infrastructure to suit. Transportability is very important, not just for cars, but also for trucks, ships and airplanes. Obviously, these cannot function if a wire must be connected to them for power. It is easier to replace stationary electricity production with SWB, but when considering powering moving things, it's a bit trickier. You need to consider, in addition to cost, the weight and the volume the fuel requires. A second key factor regarding availability is geography. Oil, gas and coal reserves are not evenly distributed, with some in every country. The geographical deposits influence on whether your country is principally an importer or an exporter of energy, and how the majority of your country's energy is actually produced. Seasonal energy demand is again geographical. Those countries further away from the equator need additional demand in the winter for heating. Storing energy is easier with hydrocarbons, bigger tanks, and changing refining production slates to target heating or diesel. In future, we will need to store that energy for many months or more to build up supply for the colder winter, or alternatively import more from elsewhere. Copper wires cannot effectively transmit energy across the seas and oceans. Their efficiency drops off, and realistically there's not enough copper wire on our planet to make it feasible for everyone. With hydrocarbons, we didn't need to reflect on these storage requirements, for these resources have been laid down over many millions of years and were fairly stable. Leaving them around for a few more months is, hey, well, no big deal. Mining them in winter is not so different to mining them in summer. Storage was not a particularly difficult or capital-intensive issue. Both electricity and hydrogen are devilishly difficult to store over weeks and months. We require grid-scale batteries or storage of some kind for electricity. And hydrogen is a difficult fuel to store. It's light, it has a high energy density, but occupies more volume than all other elements. This very lightness of hydrogen makes it difficult and expensive to store. To liquefy hydrogen and therefore significantly reduce its volume for storage, it needs to be cooled to below minus 253 degrees Celsius, something that consumes substantial energy. or alternatively compressed in multiple steel bullets at high pressure. Or, if you are particularly lucky, some areas have underground reservoirs or salt caverns that can be adapted. However, it is unlikely that these caverns are near cities where most of the consumption occurs. Energy quality is another factor to consider. Many industrial processes require very high temperatures that presently only can be achieved through burning fossil fuels. Some big CO2 emitters for high-grade energy include steel and cement. Similarly, low-grade energy for home heating is another large CO2 emitter. With the new energy systems SWB, these points will need to be addressed. Transportability, geography, seasonal demand, and industrial processes. Hydrogen is best placed as being the new fuel or as an intermediate to other transportable and storable fuels to address these concerns. Some SWB facilities can, with the addition of clean water and electrolyzers, become SWBE facilities that produce electricity and hydrogen. You can then pipe the hydrogen in the local pipeline network, akin to natural gas today, to ports and even further convert hydrogen into ammonia. While there is a roughly 20% penalty in the conversion process, ammonia could then be pumped into ships and shipped across the ocean as a commodity, just as LNG is today. Exporters and importers of ammonia will replace LNG, and over time this market will grow to become larger than that of LNG, as we're replacing almost the entire hydrocarbon energy supply. Cross-hemispheric trade can overcome some of the seasonality of energy demand. Local, seasonally active sources in country can also play a part. And while that conversion to ammonia consumed around 20% of its energy, the benefits of improved storage transportability will offset that lost efficiency. And while these losses might seem high, remember that refining oil, treating gas also consume energy, just not quite as much. Ammonia can be used in trucks, ships, and other large users through fuel cells or via a sort of combustion, and is completely renewable. For personal and light vehicle transportation, lithium and iron and similar batteries seem to have won the VHS Betamax war, with personal hydrogen-fueled vehicles not really taking off. For larger vehicles and long-range commercial transportation, the war is just starting, and hydrogen is well placed to be part of the solution. For as vehicle size increases, the batteries required increase in weight and challenge the cargo capacity and vehicle range. Meanwhile, hydrogen tanks can be refilled quickly and, because hydrogen is light, in mass terms, is substantially advantaged. But their complexity and cost is not actually in their favour. Meanwhile, lugging around 6 tons of batteries with long charging times for your electric 19-wheeler looks likely also to be less economic. In more remote locations, ammonia may be preferred over hydrogen. Similarly, trains can be transitioned to using hydrogen. The weight and volume penalties are not a hindrance, and hydrogen-powered trains are definitely in our future. Again, in remote locations, ammonia will become the fuel of choice. For ships, hydrogen, and perhaps more likely ammonia, is likely to replace heavy fuel oil as the most economic. Ammonia is perhaps the best solution as it's easy to store and transport. Cooled to minus 33 degrees C, it becomes a liquid and can be pumped. Ammonia technology has been proven and it's mature. For aviation, the picture is less clear. On short-haul trips less than 1,200 kilometers, electrically driven, battery-powered aircraft will be the winners. However, for those long-haul trips, around 80% of the market, hydrogen may be the eventual winner. It is today feasible to build a hydrogen-powered aircraft to fly long distances. Even considering the mass of the tanks and the insulation, liquid hydrogen planes can be lighter than the kerosene-powered planes of today. Again, while hydrogen is light, it occupies 4 times more volume than the equivalent kerosene. So planes actually need to be wholly redesigned to accommodate the different fuel tank shapes. Then there's the additional cost of substantial distribution and fuel storage requirements and liquefied hydrogen distribution at all airports. And of course, liquefying that hydrogen consumes more energy. Green energy, that not made with fossil fuels, today costs around $6 per kilogram. When this reaches below $2 per kilogram, it will become competitive with hydrocarbons. Do not despair, there is progress on this front. In 2013, 1 kilogram of hydrogen was $12, and as we scale, the cost will drop. The next major hurdle is capacity. World electrolyzer production is estimated by the IEA to be around 750 megawatts in total per annum in 2022. However, we will require more than 50 to 70 gigawatts per annum of electrolyzer production capacity to meet our 2050 goal. That's 50 to 100 times more than today. Yearly production seems, well, pretty inadequate today, even for one SWBE facility. So can we do this? Can we actually scale up to meet this challenge? Well, we have met a similar challenge in recent times, one that's more aligned with that of today, and that's solar cells. In 2005, world production was 2 gigawatts, and 14 years later, 2019, it reached 120 gigawatts per year, a 50-fold increase. In 1995, 1 kilowatt of solar cell cost over $200, and now the cost of a similar cell is around $10 per kilowatt. Efficiencies have changed in that time, and further advances in the future, such as perovskites, are likely to increase both efficiency and utility. Electrolyzers are also an active area of research and development, and while efficiencies may not increase substantially, there are many opportunities to reduce the capital and the operating costs. Active areas of research in material science can help with membranes, use of rhodium, platinum, and their service life. Manufacturing in the 21st century can be optimized endlessly through automation and scale. Gigafactories for batteries, for example, are being built around the world. USA, Germany, Sweden, China. These are reducing the costs of batteries with each new design and each new factory. We just need a similar effort to build electrolyzer gigafactories to reduce the cost per kilogram of hydrogen. Today, demand is in excess of supply, creating many opportunities. Ultimately, we shall be able to meet that demand, but it will definitely take some time to ratchet up to more suitable levels. That vastness of demand, along with the billions of dollars of investments required, will challenge manufacturers' inventiveness to create many types of solutions that can juggle capital and operating costs. Because of low production volumes today, electrolyzers are one of the main impediments to sub $2 of hydrogen. Every country has a very unique and individual set of needs and capabilities, and a unique supply and demand set. It will be possible for every country to build gigawatt electricity SWB installations with gigawatt electrolyzers to produce electricity and hydrogen to fuel their economies. But access to clean water, availability of land, and even seacoast for wind turbines, the intensity of sun, the intensity of the wind, and the winter-summer demand cycles will affect each country's solution. The global marketplace for LNG is a clear and easily adaptable model for ammonia shipment, and can help out with seasonal variability and provide a benchmark for energy costs. Since ammonia only needs to be cooled to minus 33 rather than the minus 160 degrees required for LNG, ships can be constructed far more cheaply to transport that fuel to market. Ammonia storage is easier in insulated steel and relatively cheap tanks. In the future, most countries will be able to produce a significant portion of their own energy domestically. For many, it will reduce their dependence on imported energy, increase national stability, and in some cases, their actual technical capability. Still, some nations will still have to import energy. Germany, Korea, Japan, for example, have large energy needs, seasonal fluctuations, and restricted land resources. While they can still invest in SWB, their onshore and offshore resources are actually limited, and it is expected that they will have to import from other nations who have the water and the sun and the sea and the wind spare that can harvest energy. Nations like Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Iran, Australia, Mexico, Ecuador, Brazil, to name a few, are best placed to become lead energy producers, and perhaps even exporters. So these important aspects, transportability, geography, manufacturing, and to a lesser extent technology, will drive increasing use of hydrogen. Sectors that will use hydrogen are primarily transport. Trucks, ships, and planes will displace hydrocarbons. Secondly, for large industries that require high quality heat, for example steel, cement and other mining and manufacturing processes, will utilise hydrogen at least in part. Some of these industries are already testing the waters, on the path from the present costs of around $6 to below $2. Users and consumers, that's you and I, will be willing to pay a premium for clean green fuel over the dirty alternative. And as a consumer, we should all be part of the solution. As scale starts to kick in, prices will drop, and then it becomes a manufacturing challenge to build both SWB and electrolyzers fast enough to meet the 2050 challenge. So it's through scale that we can displace hydrocarbons with SWB and hydrogen.